Hi, I'm Jamie Poisson. Yesterday, after deliberating for more than 9 hours over 2 days, a jury of his peers found former U.S. President Donald Trump guilty on 34 charges in the state of New York, making him the first American president to be found guilty of a felony. This conviction, not to be confused with the 3 other pending criminal cases involving Trump, stems from a hush money scheme involving payments made to a woman alleged to be his former mistress. You probably know her by her stage name, Stormy Daniels. In the lead up to the 2016 election, Donald Trump had his then attorney, Michael Cohen, pay Ms. Daniels $130,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement about any previous sexual encounters that they had had, a sum that was then paid back to Cohen by one of Trump's companies. Now, while paying hush money is not illegal on its face, making cash payments in order to hide undesirable information prior to an election and falsifying records related to that payment is. It should be said that former President Trump is expected to quickly appeal the court's decision and continues to deny any sexual involvement with Daniels. And though it's unlikely that these charges will lead to Donald Trump behind bars, each count does carry a maximum sentence of 4 years. For almost anyone else, this kind of situation would likely end a presidential bid. But for a man that has long positioned himself as the victim of state overreach or the deep state, it stands to reason that the same might not be true of Trump. So, just 6 months out from Election Day, voters are now left with an unprecedented scenario in which a convicted felon may very well become the next president of the United States. Perry Stein is a justice reporter for The Washington Post, where she is also the co-author of the Trump Trials newsletter. She's my guest today to talk about the conviction of the former U.S. president and what comes next for Donald Trump and America. Perry, I want to thank you so much for making the time to talk to us tonight, just a few hours after this really unprecedented verdict.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first former president in American history to be convicted of a crime.
Let's start with Trump's reaction to what happened today. What did the former president have to say for himself?
So he said what he said much throughout this trial and in the months preceding it.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace.
Most of the stuff has been said without evidence or has been falsely said, but that is what he said, that this is rigged. But the interesting thing that he said was he told the American people in a video statement after the verdict came down that the voters will decide the real verdict, that this will be decided at the election ballot. So, he's going to continue on campaigning. I mean, in the legal system, right? He is guilty. That is without doubt. But to his point, the impact of this on his political future will be decided by voters.
Yeah, and I want to get into that a little bit more with you today. So, but first, this decision came very quickly, right? Just tell me if you were surprised by that and what that might tell us, what that told you.
I wasn't making any predictions on how long it would take. You just don't know. You don't know the personalities or what the jury was thinking during the weeks of testimony. But once it came down, once I heard there was a verdict, I assumed that it was going to be a guilty conviction and not a hung jury. Because if it was a hung jury, you would have expected it to take longer than this, I think.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that it was all counts, I think it's 34, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I make no predictions in this, but, the counts were all the same. They could have divided, there were 2 checks that apparently didn't have a signature on it. They could have divided it by that. They could have said, the 34 counts related to falsification of business records on invoices, checks, and ledgers. I guess it's plausible the jury could have divided it into some of those buckets. But, 34 counts of the same counts. I guess I wasn't totally surprised that they went the same way on all the counts, but
Yeah.
I guess I wouldn't have been surprised the other way either.
So just, I'm so curious to pick your brain on this as somebody who has followed this case so closely. I know, obviously, as you said, you can't put yourselves in the minds of the jurors. We don't know exactly what they were thinking, but as somebody who watched the trial, what testimonies and what evidence do you think most likely moved them to convict here?
I think it's a mix of two things, right? I think that David Pecker and Stormy Daniels and her lawyer, Pete Davidson, who testified, really, and sorry, let me take a step back, right? In order to get a conviction, prosecutors had to prove not just that he falsified business records, but that he did so in an effort to impact the outcome of the 2016 presidential election, and violated some laws related to that. So they had to put it, and Trump has said he wanted this alleged affair that he denies with Stormy Daniels covered up because he didn't want his wife to know. So they had to prove the election thing. And I think that some of those witnesses did a pretty effective job on that. You had Stormy Daniels' lawyer saying, hey, we knew that Stormy Daniels' story, right, the value price to purchase it so she will not go public, would go down after the election. We knew it wouldn't be worth anything after the election. And Trump's people said, yeah, Trump was trying to push off paying it till after the election. And those were interesting. They had a lot of witnesses that effectively kind of tied this to the election. And then the closer, I guess, and I didn't know what the jury would think of him, was Michael Cohen, right? This is Trump's fixer. He's a problematic witness in that he's been convicted of crimes, including lying to Congress, but he had to be the one to connect Donald Trump to this, right? Like, who'd say that Donald Trump knew that these business records were falsified. Donald Trump orchestrated this scheme. So he was the important one in terms of that. And while he had credibility issues, I mean, it seems at the very least, he didn't sink the case for the prosecution.
Right. The jury found that he was essentially credible enough for them to obviously come to this verdict. So we talked about how Donald Trump said this is far from over, right? And just from like a legal procedural perspective here, what happens next? What happens now?
So, I mean, he can appeal the case, and I think he's expected to appeal the case. That could take a long time. Like, I would doubt that would happen before the election, right? That an appeal would be, anything's possible, right? But that these things move slowly, that an appeal would make it through the court system. And
considering how high stakes this is there a scenario in which it could be fast tracked through the court system?
Yeah, anything is possible, I guess. New York State works differently than federal court, but that process is typically slow. I mean, the question is do they put off some other parts of this, right, until an appeals goes through, right? He has a sentencing hearing in July. This isn't a violent crime. This isn't like, even if, we've reported that it's likely that he will not get prison time just because he's a 77-year-old first-time nonviolent offender. But even, I guess it's possible that a judge could put off, some of the sentencing stuff until an appeals. But, we just don't know. I mean, it's not like, I do think that it is likely that he will go to he will be on the ballot in November as a convicted felon.
If the sentence isn't likely prison, like what might it be?
I don't know. I mean, he could get like home confinement, or he could get some sort of probation that he can't do certain things. So it could be a number of things.
I guess one question I do have, and sorry if it's like a kind of naive one, if he were to become president, could he just pardon himself?
So that is a good question. And there's a lot of, first of all, let me take a step back. This is a state crime, right? So, a governor pardons state crimes, not a president. The federal cases, right? He faces 2 state cases and 2 federal cases. So he has more authority over the federal cases than he would over a state case, right? But New York is different. So essentially on this one, I think there's a lot of legal scholars, whether he could pardon himself anyways, questions about that. But on this one, this is a state case, so he would not have that authority. He would not have as much authority over that.
So his recourse is really through the appeals process. And just another procedural question for you on this case. How high up could an appeal go on a case like this? Could it conceivably go all the way up to the Supreme Court?
That is unlikely, right? I mean, because again, it is a state's court, so it would go up to the equivalent of the New York State Supreme Court. You have seen rarely, sometimes state courts, if it I don't know if your viewers followed this, but the Colorado case to get Trump off the ballot, saying that he participated in an insurrection, because that had to deal with presidential powers. After it went up to the Colorado Supreme Court, it went to the federal Supreme Court. This case, remember now, he made the payments, right, while he was president, but a lot of the crime, a lot of the intent, a lot of part of this crime occurred before he was president. So I would imagine presidential powers wouldn't play a big role in this. So it seems unlikely that it would go up to the federal Supreme Court, but I'm not a Supreme Court reporter, so I don't want to say for sure, but it seems very unlikely.
You mentioned the three other cases that he's facing, involving an effort to overturn the 2020 election and the improper use of classified documents. Just very briefly, where are we at with these other cases? Is there a scenario in which we see trials for them before the November election?
I think anything is possible and anything is not possible. I think that, for instance, the Florida case, we don't even have a date anymore. She moved it to this is Judge Cannon in Florida. She moved it said it was indefinitely postponed. The way the pretrial dates that she set have been scheduled, makes it, I would say, highly unlikely that one would happen before the election. But again, things could change. The DC one, it could, in theory. I think there's a lot of people that I've talked to that think it could happen before the election. Right now, if you recall, it's tied up in the Supreme Court on this idea of question of presidential immunity. Trump has claimed that presidential immunity from criminal prosecution should extend to the activities that are alleged in that federal DC indictment. So the Supreme Court is, we think they could deliver a decision in the next, in June or July, which means that, let's say it needs 90 days, July, August, it could go before the election.
Right now, though, at this current moment, is it fair for me to say that, save for the July 11th sentencing on the hush money case, he's kind of wide open, right? To campaign and
He has some pretrial proceedings that he has to be at, but right now, if you look at no three of them have current trial dates that go before the election.
Sorry, I'm asking you so many legal questions, but if I could throw one more at you, just picking up on what we were talking about before, this idea that he might be able, whether or not he could pardon himself on this conviction, on the hush money case conviction. Just to kind of summarize what we were saying before, is it fair for me to say that on these three other cases, he could conceivably get into office and then try to pardon himself, maybe even before he goes to trial on these cases? I'm sure it would be a fight and people would disagree with him, but that's conceivable, right?
Look, I think a lot of this is debated on by scholars on this. This has never been tested. And I think what is the scenario that I have turned up to say more likely is if they don't go to trial and he wins, Trump could try to get an attorney general, right? Trump nominates the attorney general, then that attorney general is confirmed by the Senate. He could try to get an attorney general who would dismiss the cases, right? So say we're dropping charges.
Right.
So that is a scenario I've heard. We know his attorney generals don't always do what he wants them to do, but if he wins the election, that is a scenario that is one that could happen.
Okay. And if you're president, can you be subjected to ongoing trials, or would they be on pause just automatically?
That's a good, yeah, DOJ guidance. I mean, look, all of this is untested stuff, but like DOJ policy, so I'm sorry, the Federal Department of Justice guidance and policy is that, a sitting president cannot be charged with a crime or be prosecuted. So I think that would extend to going to trial. So if he is elected and the charges remain without going to trial, it is conceivable that he could go to trial after he leaves office.
Got it. Right. Gotcha. Okay. And I'll just end this conversation. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time with a question that's maybe a little bit less legal and more political. Considering the fact that we probably won't see verdicts in these other cases before Election Day, but we do have this verdict right now. Do we have any sense of whether or not Americans will care enough about this verdict for it to influence their votes? Like, has there been any polling on this? I know it would have been a hypothetical question at the time, but do we think that they're going to care enough for it to influence how they vote?
I have no idea. I mean, look, I know Donald Trump would probably have rather not been convicted, I would guess. So if that says anything, but look, he had these 3 or 4 mounting indictments and he is expected to win the Republican nominee. So, that is, it didn't dissuade Republican voters from electing him in the general election. I don't know. We work on slim margins here, so who's to say?
Mm-hmm. Perry, thank you so much for this. This was really interesting, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
All right, that is all for today. Front Burner was produced this week by Matt Alma, Ali Janes, Matt Muse, Derek Vanderwyk, and Ben Lopez-Steven. Sound design was by Matt Cameron and Marco Luciano. Music is by Joseph Shabason. Our senior producer is Elaine Chow. Our executive producer is Nick McCabe-Locos. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you on Monday.